Alrighty, so hello everyone and welcome. I am Mel Svelton. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a April board member and moderator for this meeting today. Thank you so much for joining us for the Diversity and Inclusion Peer Support Meeting. I want to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, when you scroll over the screen, a menu bar pops up. Depending on what device you are on, you can find the menu bar at the top or at the bottom of the screen. There is where you will find the closed captioning for today's session. You can view the captioning by selecting the CC tab on the menu bar. For sign language interpreting, you can find the interpreter on the screen with the name Interpreter Larissa and Interpreter Erica. If you are only able to see the speaker, make sure you are in gallery view so you can see the interpreter and the presentation at the same time. You can find the option to change the view at the top of your screen under a tab for view. If you are having technical issues, please use the chat feature. You can find the word bubble in the same menu bar. Once that is selected, that will allow you to follow along with the chat and add in your comments. If you would like to turn the chat feature off, if you are using a screen reader, you can also do that by pressing Alt-H. To ask a question or make a comment, you can also select the hand option on the menu bar, and that allows us to know you have a question. For those of you on the phone today or using keystrokes, we ask that you press *9 or Alt-Y on your keypad to raise your hand. We will then let you know when you can unmute. You can select the unmute option on Alt-A if using keystrokes. Remember, if you join into the conversation, please keep all background noise down as much as possible to allow us to hear you clearly. As a last reminder, April and our conference is a safe and inclusive space for marginalized communities, especially inside of this meeting. We ask that everyone present in the session today treat each other with respect, and that you enter this and every session with good intentions. This includes respecting names, pronouns, and other personal identifiers, and avoiding the use of harmful or derogatory language. I would also like to note that though this meeting is being recorded, this will not be posted. We want this to be a safe place for people to voice their experience and to voice their lived experience. With that, I want to say thank you so much for being here today. And just as an overview, we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their experience in IL as part of a marginalized community. And then once we're through that, we will take questions and also comments and just giving a place for people to talk about their experience. We ask that we all speak from our experience. So with that, I will pass this off to Beth Quarles, our leader inside of DEI, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Mel. Thank you for participating in this well-needed workshop. I will start with, my name is Beth Quarles. I am a Native American. I married an African American. I have 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. First part of my life, I grew up on a horse farm with my grandmother, and then transitioned to live with our parents when my mother and father first moved to Chicago and then moved to North Carolina and then to Indiana. My father, who went to Michigan State, where I first faced racism when my father was I'm sorry, summa cum laude for Michigan State and was supposed to give the presentation for all the graduates of his class. And when they found out that he was a Native American, he was told that he could not give the presentation. We were all there for his presentation, and they escorted myself and 3 of my other siblings and my mother out. My mother is Welsh and African American and looks like she is white. So you can just imagine how we felt as we were escorted out of Michigan State University. When I went to Ball State University and growing up as a child, I was called different names, mixed, Indian. They would play with my braids. They were very long, and they would call me giddy up for a horse. It was very mixed motions. And then once I married my husband, as I said, he was African American. He is African American. Been married to him for 42 years. We had a very good relationship, but then once his parents saw me, again, not seeing it from the Caucasian side, but now seeing it from the African American side, saying, where are you from? What's your name? Just all different kinds of things. When we had our wedding, my mother's side of the family appears white. My father's is Indian. My husband was African American, and it's like we were in 3 different groups. I didn't think that would happen, but it did, because my husband is from Kentucky, and so his grandparents were slaves and were slaves, and then also they were house cleaners. And so they didn't allow white people into their homes. And so that was a very different experience when the wedding came. And then we began to have children, and the question would come to me as, what do you think the children are going to look like? What are you going to say that your children are? Just a lot of different views, just from the circle within our family. My family was used to that experience of being an outsider, but my husband had not had that same experience that I had. He had the experience, let me say this, he had the experience, but from an African American viewpoint, civil rights and those kinds of things. So to just give you a little bit of background of my background, as I said, then I went into employment. I started working as at the deaf school. I became a certified interpreter. Very few minorities were an interpreter as the time that I was there, and started in 1990. And then I went to work, sheltered workshop, and I worked into the mental health. And then I became a founder of Future Choices, There were 6 individuals that had different disabilities, but as I was in the different fields, I did not see the minority population being outreached, or not to say that they weren't outreached. I feel that some organizations just didn't know how to approach the minority population. So we worked on just recruiting minorities, and I wanted the staff to have a diverse background. And I think that that was one of the things that I really pushed for. But the other thing that I really pushed for, that I think that we were very unique, is when you walk into our center, that you see a diverse group of individuals, but you see a group of individuals that any person could come into the center and could have questions, and their questions could be answered. So we have maintained that, and we have utilized that throughout the 28 years. Let me turn this over so that our next person is Aries Franklin.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon to you, those of you on the East Coast and in the different time zones if it's no longer morning. My name is Aries Franklin. I'm 34 years old. I have cerebral palsy. I've been in this field, in the independent living field, for 12 years. I started out as a youth. So for any of you who have questions or reservations about where to start, how to get into this field and make an impact, always start out as a youth. But if you can't, I'll talk about some of my many talents. I'm very good at engaging. I started out as a youth coordinator. I didn't know what I was doing when I first started, and so I had to build it from the ground up. I am of African American descent, African American parents, much like Beth was saying in her story. It was very interesting to me because I have cerebral palsy, and so it affects my mobility, and I use a walker. So that's something that everybody can see. And so with that being a stigma put on that of me not being able to do things on my own, like get up and walk, or, what people call the normal things, using air quotes, it made things very tough as far as just trying to change perceptions. And as I look back on it now that I'm older, it also hardened me a lot. So it made it hard for me to want to accept help and things like that. So when I went to my first center, and they had to have an honest conversation with me, like, we all have disabilities here, so don't feel ashamed, don't feel like you have to over maneuver. If you hear me use that word a lot in my story, it's because I'm starting to figure out what that means for me. So if I know that I can't get around the best way I can, it was hard for me to ask for help, to the point to where I lost out on a lot of things, good pay, decent relationships, and just overall a chance to really show people what independent living is all about, because I was stubborn. With that being said, I kind of want to share a little bit about what it takes to really be in this field. And I know we are diversity, equity, and inclusion, but sometimes we don't really think about what inclusion may mean for some of us. And for me, inclusion meant just trying to find where I fit in. A lot of times I thought I was too disabled for the normal world, or mainstream as we call it. And I thought I was too mainstream for the disability community, because I looked at, like most people, I looked at having a disability as something that if you can't do it yourself, or if you don't ask for help, then, or if you're asking for too much help, no one's going to take you seriously. But coming into the independent living movement, I realized that we ask for help because we all have a team and a team of supports. So when you hear us talking about our stories today, that will be the underlying theme of knowing what we need, knowing how to enter our communities and use the supports, which would be you guys, the youth we're working with, or the consumers we serve. And just knowing that we had to understand ourselves and understand what we needed in order to serve you the best. Another thing we wanted to just talk about is just, again, making it a safe space for everyone to share their story in the hopes that people will feel comfortable. Any questions that you may have, please please use the time to get your question answered. Don't sit there and be prideful or say I'm not sure. Or we want to hear that, because that's the only way you'll know. That's the only way you'll start to feel comfortable and acclimated in this space. Thank you for allowing me to share my story and my time. I'm going to pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you, Arius. Before we pass it on to Armand, I would just like to read the chat. We have a post from the April office. If you are seeing multiple black boxes of attendees' names, you can change this by choosing gallery view at the top right under view. You can also go to any participant and choose the three. Oh, sorry, somebody just tried to call me. You can also go to any participants and choose the three dots next to their name and choose the option hide non-video participants. This will make your view during the session easier to follow. So I will pass this to Armand.
This is Herman, and thank you, Mels. My name is Herman Perotti. I am a board member with April, and I am currently a co-chair along Beth with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, as well as with a co-chair with the Emergency Preparedness and Response Committee. I am a brown-skinned Puerto Rican man sitting in my wheelchair. I am coming to you from my home in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the occupied land of the Lenape, L-E-N-A-P-E people. I moved to Philadelphia in 2004 from Puerto Rico, where I was a victim of a carjacking, of a shooting on my neck, a survivor of gun violence, and I'm a quadriplegic. In the first 3 years of my life, then 17 years old, as a newly disabled, for all intents and purposes, bedridden, because for over a year I did not have a wheelchair after my injury. Mind you, thanks to the current protections under the ACA, the Obamacare, which prohibits limiting services to people with pre-existing conditions. When I was 17 in 2001 and survived the carjacking and the shooting, I was 17, and a month later, in July, then a month later, my insurance chip cut me off because then I had a pre-existing condition. My grandmother who raised me then had no social supports and had to mortgage the house and pay out of pocket all expenses. I didn't have inpatient therapy to a year later, or a wheelchair. And that was thanks to a Make-A-Wish approach in Puerto Rico. Needing to, for all intended purposes, evacuate a situation where I did not have opportunities at that time to accessibly and equitably go to college and pursue work and education further. Then I was married already. I was 18, and with my grandmother, and now we're friends. Then my wife, now we've been divorced for many years, but good friends. We moved to Philadelphia with family and friends, seeking for access, seeking infrastructure, education, work access. Within months, I connected with Liberty Resources in Philadelphia. The leadership, executive director is a Mexican man, seeing other executive directors, currently Theo Bratty, who sits at the National Council on Disability. Then he was an executive director of a Center for Independent Living in Central Pennsylvania, a Black man, quadriplegic, executive director, seeing that there are disabled people of color, peers, I'll go back to that have been given the opportunities that have not been, as Beth was expressing earlier, just walls completely. No, these were community, the SIL and the leadership that mentored me. I could find people of color with disabilities. I could find an array of peers, some of them and many people who are white, friends, people with disabilities that could teach me, and that we could together teach each other how to best find access, how to together fight for equity. We use these words sometimes lightly, excuse my hand there on the camera. Over the last few years, we have been hearing strongly diversity, equity, inclusion, and more recently, accessibility, DEIA. Even though these are more, current terms being really used, but we've known them for long. Why don't we find for a moment at least a common ground? What do we mean by this? When we mean diversity, we mean taking practice of including multiply marginalized communities and marginalized communities, people with different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, abilities, cultures, and beliefs of the American people in this country. When we say equity, means the consistency of systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all peoples, and with a lens at prioritizing the equity of what is considered underserved communities. Everybody who is not a white, able-bodied male of a middle income, at least. When we say inclusion, and as Arias was explaining earlier, means the recognition and appreciation of the talents and skills all people have, regardless of background. And in making a world that is accessible, from the laws to culture to comprehending that people with disabilities meet the bodies of intersection. Disability, we don't have a land to point to, which has been hard to, over the decades, bring us under one call sometimes. But we want the choices, we want options, we want freedom as American people in this country. And that, I think, unites us in one pursuit. I worked at the SIL for over 5 years. I started going for a vocational type of training. Quickly, they employed me. First training, very quickly into an independent living specialist. Did information referral and advocacy were my primary areas. But as all IL specialists, we need to circle 5 core services. And recognizing people with disabilities in the United States are, about 1 in 4 people? We've had the number 61 million people for 3 or 4 years. That has to have changed. When we look at other intersectionalities, considering Beth explaining from her understanding, the approach of living as a person understanding this land is mine and being pushed away by others. Arias explaining how there needs to be an extra, just extra to demonstrate our worth. And when we compound intersectionalities in the employment field and in human resources on this in the bad side of it, not dark, but in the bad, that's what I meant. Trying to always fix our language. In the bad side of it, they have a term of what is the worst employable person? A Black quadriplegic woman of LGBTQ. Why have they decided this? And how does that impact us? Our marginalization is not by act of nature. It is in policy, it is in practice, it is by excluding us, it is by segregating us out of the decision-making throughout. As I mentioned, I worked at the SIL for 5-6 years. Quickly, they were very much encouraging. I go back to college, which I did. I got an associate's in behavioral and social studies, and then went to Temple for political science in Philadelphia and throughout Pennsylvania, and nationally since 2006. I joined ADAPT, protested here and across the country, primarily focusing on access to transportation, access to home and community-based services that do not impact the consumer and that we can protect and expand our supports. Did many work on home and community-based services implementation and managed care throughout Pennsylvania and surrounding states. And in 2017, through the organization that now I'm a co-executive director of, the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, I was deployed along a team of respondents to Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria, where, as explained, I'm originally from. And I had visited numerous times, but it had been a number of years. And we went a week after the storm. And this was a Category 5 destruction storm that was catastrophic. It changed the dynamic. It was a generational trauma that still 5-6 years, almost 6 years later, 5 years now, the electric grid, almost 3 million people live in Puerto Rico, and 250,000 are without power at any given time. And when we think of our communities, people with disabilities, people power dependent, needing medication to be in cold storage, needing to just power our wheelchairs, needing to keep some level of air conditioner in extreme heat and humidity to prevent skin wounds, and the list goes on. I was, and I am not the only person in Puerto Rico. And many of you in rural America will know people that have just not had access to a mobility aid. And that is why they are, quote unquote, bedbound. In 2017, we did a 3-week deployment. We served hundreds of families of people with disabilities. We continued supporting MAVI, M-A-V-I, the Center for Independent Living. I could go on, and I encourage you all to contact us to join more if you're interested on emergency talk with the Emergency Preparedness and Response Committee. But we have been able to achieve life-saving activities by ensuring collaboration between the Center for Independent Living and local emergency management, where in Maria, people with disabilities were left behind completely. Just following Hurricane Fiona 3 weeks ago, and the earthquake in 2020 in January was close to a 7.0. in Puerto Rico, because of the collaboration, people with disabilities were prioritized in response and rescue. And hundreds of people that are without mobility aids were evacuated with the collaboration. And that is part of recognizing why we are, I think, every day do our work. I still work with Centers for Independent Living across the country, and right now in Florida, in the response to Fiona. And the primary directive we have is prevent institutionalization, ensure independence by informed decision. And these are words that we use every day, but we need to own them. We need to hold ourselves accountable to them, because in this world that is dominated by white supremacism in its core, this country's paradigm is changing over the next generation. Latinos make close to 20% of the population in the United States. Black Americans in the statistics are close behind. I believe it should be higher, if not equal, on the amount of people. And when we include all people that are not just Caucasian or white, white will not be the majority. And when we are living in those times, and our communities of color across the board will be the most marginalized, because we are in dangerous times where if we don't protect and expand upon all the services that keep us independent, and our education, which is critical to this, does not meet the language, cultural needs of your consumers, of your community. If your education is not, may have information in Spanish, certainly American Sign Language and maybe other sign languages as it is in your areas, but maybe looking at the census and looking at what are the languages primarily spoken in your coverage areas. Outreaching to community leadership of these communities and looking for engagement, looking for ways to collaborate. We find that ultimately it is the equitable future we want to build.
I need
Yep.
to unmute myself. Thank you. Thank you so much, Herman. So I mentioned earlier, my name is Mel Felton. I use they, them pronouns. As a description, I am a white, non-binary trans individual with blue hair that is pulled up into a ponytail with light blue bangs across my face. I am currently calling from Spokane, Washington, which is the unceded lands of the Spokane people. I am a autistic, mentally ill individual, and I am also queer. Using that term positively and reclaiming it. I'm part of the LGBT community. I am the director of the Inland Northwest Disability Experience, which is a new center for independent living serving Eastern Washington. So the side of Washington that is not Seattle. And one of the things that I noticed in building this organization from the ground up as a queer person is because of my queerness, I was able to reach out to LGBTQ communities, and a lot of our consumers coming in were and are LGBTQ, and they came and part of that inside of the independent living movement was like, because we had that representation inside of our staff, we had someone who could make authentic connections with that community. And I think that's one of the things that is specifically important about our staffing inside of IL, is that when we inside of IL, we believe in peer support and we believe in lived experience. And with that lived experience, we have, when we look just through the lens of disability, we hire individuals with disabilities. We have to be 51% or more individuals with disabilities. So as Herman mentioned, using the census, seeing one of the things that we've done as a center is looking at our census and seeing what communities need to be represented inside of our staff and inside of our consumers. And when we see those discrepancies, doing outreach to those communities specifically to make sure that they are being, that they have equal access and also encouraged access to our centers. And one of the things I wanted to talk about specifically as a white queer person is I've experienced discrimination through my queerness, but I've experienced extreme privilege through my whiteness. And this comes from we have systemic structures inside of all parts of our society, and that includes SILs, these systemic structures that keep communities of color, that keep queer communities, that keep multiply marginalized and those who have been historically excluded out of our SILs as consumers, as staff. I know from, I love the independent living movement so much. And as many of you do, as you're here as part of this conference, and I pour everything that I have into it. But one of the things that we have to have an honest conversation with is the systemic barriers that we have for obtaining our services, for becoming a staff member. And when I talk about these systems, this doesn't always look like one person, like you can't, not just imagining a person who is specifically coming out with malice, but just there, even if everybody has the best intentions, if we're still following these systems, then we are still having people excluded. And when we want to run a movement that is, that has everybody, and especially one that emphasizes the importance of peer support and peer networking, we need to be looking at our structures and at the systemic barriers that are there and what we like. I think IL is in a place where we can make some radical change, especially through the lens of disability justice. Because what do we do inside of IL but work with consumers to remove barriers or overcome barriers that are keeping them towards independence? So as IL, we are specifically trained to overcome these barriers, these systemic barriers for disability. So IL has the chance to overcome these systemic barriers that exist for BIPOC communities, for LGBT communities, for just to make a more inclusive movement. And that's one of the things that we've been doing at the Index office. I encourage looking up what your most commonly spoken language besides English is inside of your area. And not assuming what it is, but looking at it. I know inside of the areas that we serve, it is Marshallese and Russian are our most spoken non-English languages. So making our documentation accessible through language. And also, I think the best thing that we can do is collaborating with other organizations, bringing disability into the topic of when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because disability affects everybody at some point inside of their lives. I think many of us have heard you are either disabled or temporarily not disabled. It's just part of the human experience. And bringing that into the talk of diversity, equity, inclusion, but also bringing diversity, equity, inclusion into the disability talk, because we know that those who are, as Herman said, we have those who are most marginalized. Like if you are a Black woman who is quadriplegic, you would face more systemic barriers. So what we can do to first start recognizing these barriers, to increase our education as independent living centers, to learn about white supremacy culture, to learn about disability justice. And one of the things that I think I want to challenge everybody with is these conversations, especially though if you do come from a position of privilege, like I mentioned, because of my whiteness, there's an extreme privilege that I experience. These conversations can be uncomfortable. And oftentimes when we experience discomfort, our first thing we want to do is get rid of the discomfort and get it away from us. But when it comes to these conversations, we want to, I want to challenge everybody to sit with that discomfort and kind of dissect it and see what is the core of this discomfort, and learning from it. Discomfort is often a learning experience. I've as as an individual with severe anxiety, examining my discomfort has made me a better ally and a better accomplice to communities that I may not be a part of, but know that as a disability advocate, disability is a part of every community. So we should be allies to every community. We should be accomplices to every community. And that's what we're hoping to build inside of the center that I am running, as well as want to build centers across the country. So I would like to, with that, those are our speakers that we have, but for the next part of the conversation, we would like to open it up for people to share their experiences, ask questions. I would like to go back to just a reminder that this conference is a safe and inclusive space for marginalized communities. So one of the things I also challenge you to do is to take space, but also make space. So use this as a learning opportunity to hear from those who have lived experience in the IL movement and what it's like to be a part of a marginalized community within a marginalized community. And with that, I would like to, I'm going to be checking the chat for any questions. If you would prefer to ask questions in the chat, or I can encourage you to raise your hand if you have any questions or want to share from your lived experience. So I want to open up the floor.
Hey, Mels, this is Arius again. And once again, for the new people arriving into the session, I thank you guys thank you all, for always working on our language. I thank you all for wanting to hear our stories, hear about our experiences. But I also had a question to you all. We've been talking a lot about marginalized groups. We've also been talking about the supports and some of the stigmas that are put onto us as a disability community, or even how we identify, or the lack of access. And we're talking about increasing education. My question to the group is, what if there weren't those supports in place? What if we didn't have any access to any of those things? What are some ways we can look at the world around us and make something out of nothing? Because even for us to be in this session today, we had to come from a place of not tired, not angry, not frustrated, but we had nothing, whether we didn't have the opportunity, we didn't have the space, we didn't have the time, the access, the education. So how would we all do that if we had to overcome our greatest fears or our greatest obstacles, which is our self-doubt, our concern, our I'm not sure, the uncertainty. So if anybody can answer that question for me, that'd be great too. And just not to forget about the chat, um, Rachel says, what would you say are some good ways to be an ally in a way that is helpful and not performative? That is a good question. Um, I'll give my thoughts on it, and then anybody else who wants to take that as well. I think one way to be an ally in a way that is helpful is just understanding that person's strengths. So, for example, um, for me, like I said before, just going back to having a physical disability and then being a person of color, which is African American or Black. Um, a lot of times when things happen, people will say, "Oh, let's." If you're being discriminated against, or somebody says, "Hey, I'm not racist because I have a Black daughter," which was told to me recently, we all know what that means, right? But from the ally standpoint, it's a quick and easy fix to get angry and say, I don't think this is right. I don't think you should say that, or and get angry, right? But everything is an educational and teachable moment. So I think instead of getting angry, we can try to understand where that person is coming from, because they may just be ignorant and not know that it was the wrong thing to say. I mean, it is 2022, but those people still exist out there. When I talk about the ignorance piece of it. So I think one way to be helpful in that is just, hey, once the situation, first de-escalate the situation, and then go on to say, hey, that may not have been the best way to say that. What were you really trying to say? And then as the ally, instead of just getting frustrated and heated, we can both just try to have a conversation and make sure it's coming from a place that works for everybody. And that's just my thought on it. Like I said, somebody else can take it if they want to.
This is Beth. And to answer that, one of the things that our center did is I think that you can work with allies. We saw that there was a need for accessible housing. And we also saw that there was land in disparate areas. So we went to the mayor. The mayor gave us property, and we demonstrated how to build by, we were the developers. We built a 37 unit. We built 12 accessible units. We campaigned by saying we wanted an inclusive apartment building, not just for people with disabilities, but for people with all disabilities. And then 6 of us got together, one person that was visually impaired, one person that was in an L-shaped wheelchair, because there's, I know that Herman could speak on this, very different types of wheelchairs. Some people just think it's just a chair, but it's not. And then we had deaf, and then we had a person that had low vision. So we all got together and we built this apartment complex. And then we had people from all across the United States to come in and to see this universal design developed and designed by people with disabilities. So I want to say that you can start just small groups. Again, just like what Herman has said, you know, when we think of disasters, you know, we need to think that we need to come together with all disabilities, all types of disabilities, all ages, to make success. And people need to see us there. So I think that's one of the things that we can do as you know, as allies.
I'd like to jump in on this question. And I'm restating the question, what would you say are some good ways to be an ally in a way that is helpful and not performative? And I kind of see it in, at least the approach that I have taken, especially wanting to not just be an ally, but be an accomplice to marginalized communities that are not part of my identity. Is I think the first step is showing up, keeping a lookout for what is going on inside of your community and how you can show up to not just lend your voice, but lend a body. One of the things that we've done is our community inside of Spokane has experienced a very severe housing crisis, and specifically with we have a large houseless community. And so that means our center showing up to houselessness coalition meetings, making sure that we are there, not just to bring a disability voice or bring our own agenda, but to show up. And that's my second step, to listen and hear what is going on, and not just one of the things that I struggle with, because of my anxiety is always running, and because of my autism, I try to have scripts for everything. And so I challenge myself, what can I do to listen and not just try to make waiting to talk? So you show up, you listen, volunteer, just giving your labor to an organization or to a cause. Can show that you're not just there to be for the fair weather, or for just there's a march and you show up for the march and nothing else, but also volunteer your time. We all have different skills that we can bring. I know one of the things you don't see while I'm on screen is that I have a service dog. So going and doing, being able to show up at action movements or marches, that's something I often can't do with my service dog. But what I can do is provide mutual aid. We go and get snacks, and we bring down first aid supplies, and making sure people are just like, they have snacks, they have first aid. So like recognizing your strengths and what you can give. And then I think the most important thing is, don't expect a reward. Oftentimes just showing up, listening, and volunteering, at least in my opinion, is the bare minimum that can be done. It's just reaching the bar. And so we've all experienced inside of the disability community when somebody just reaches the bar, and we're like, okay, we're glad that you reached the bar, but there needs to be more as well. And that goes for the same of other marginalized communities. So just to go over those four: show up, listen, volunteer, and don't expect a reward, is the best answer that I can give to that question. And then this is a space that we want to make sure that is safe. So if you feel free to post a question. If you are worried about posting a question, you can send it to me privately, just under Mel Svelton, and we can share that anonymously as well. I know that inside of these spaces, there can often be a fear of, what if I mess up and say the wrong thing? we're all coming in here with the best intentions, and I appreciate recognizing that impact that intentions can have, though we do not, I talk a lot about intentions versus impact. Oh, I got one. So as a white person, I've been told by other white people that it would be better or easier for information about DEI to come from a white person to a white group because they can ask questions without offending anybody. That feels wrong to me. What's your take on it? I'd like to open that up to the group, just because I've been doing a lot of talking and I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to talk.
This is Beth again. I appreciate that question. Thank you for asking that question. I think that you are right in feeling that it's wrong for you to go and approach a white group. If you were going to approach a white group and you had a disability, yes, and no one else had one. But I think that right now, with the culture and the movement, I think it's so very important to outreach to a minority and let the minority come in and speak. We have faced a lot of discrimination, and there's a lot of discrimination, as you know, as Mels has mentioned. You know, there's a lot of different types of discrimination. So, and even if you went to the group, I think it's most important. This is why we're having this, is that you begin to feel comfortable in talking to other cultures. It's okay for me to go and talk to my group because it's easy. But sometimes we have to come out of our comfort zone so that we understand others. So thank you for that question, and I think it's very good.
Arius or Herman, would you have anything that you'd like to add to that question?
This is Arius. Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. As a white person, I have been told by other white people that it would be better or easier for information about diversity, equity, and inclusion to come from a white person to a white group because then they can ask questions without offending anyone. That feels wrong to me. What's your take on that?
So my take on it, if it feels wrong to you, then you are probably having the right feeling at that point, because if it's a group about a certain another group coming from someone who looks like you, then it wouldn't be the same. It's just like, it's all about representation matters, and that goes a long way with information as well. For a long time, just living in now living in predominantly white areas, there are a lot of things that I say and it may not affect them in a way that it affects me, or just because I was the only Black person working or living in that area when current events happen, then they look to me to give them the answers. And I can respect that more when someone looks to me for that, as opposed to someone saying you should just let a white person tell you. Because if you're letting someone who looks like you, but they definitely don't understand that cultural impact, right? So if it feels wrong to you, it is. You should always reach out to other groups, other cultures, other backgrounds and walks of life to gain a different perspective, because 9 times out of 10, when you go to that other group, So if you are a white person coming to a black person for information on like how to cook or just why we wear our hair in braids or protective hairstyles, you're not wrong for that, and we won't look at you wrong. We'll most likely give you the answers you need in order to feel good about yourself and move on with your day. You need to go to other groups, other cultures to get a beautiful perspective, I'm going to say. And it may not always, it may hurt your feelings. You may feel some type of way, but you have to put your pride to the side, right? You have to continue to, swallow your pride, not let it affect your ego because you're trying to learn. Remember that teachable moment, the increase of education. Well, that's where it starts. I'm just in my thought right there.
This is Herman. We are navigating with a colleague in London, on the other side of the Atlantic, who about a week ago, was charged for the dining of patrons around them in a restaurant because their disability made uncomfortable the other patrons a week ago. 30, 40 years ago, we have in this country many examples where people with disabilities, because of our disability, were not allowed into spaces. We could not go into public because unwanted. Now, today we acknowledge and recognize and focus on elevating the subject matter expertise of lived experiences. In peer support, as people with disabilities, we know living our lives, being ingrained in the culture, makes us subject matter experts of our lives and to a part in the disability community. And we know that we wouldn't happily accept a non-disabled person coming to educate us about the disability life experience across its ways, in all ways, in intersectionalities within the disability community and our lives. And we know many people that go around teaching, quote unquote, about how to work best, do things best, but not collaborate and not build with people with disabilities. To directly the question of it is uncomfortable. These are uncomfortable conversations, and understanding. Hey Rick, I think you're off mute. As Mel said, deconstructing these understandings and coming together. Hey, if you're interested in having this conversation, it's maybe uncomfortable, but we come in the best intent possible to come to a common understanding of what we need to accomplish together.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I have the next question I see inside the chat. Do any of you have DEI policies at your CILs, and what do they look like? How do you implement them in the recruitment of new staff? I would love to speak on this because this is what my CIL has been concentrating on. And I will post links inside of the chat once I am done speaking. But there is a inside of our state, we have the Just Lead Washington put together a toolkit for specifically analyzing your organization and the systems of oppression that may exist inside of its policies, that may exist just because of systemic white supremacy inside of our culture. And so I'll link this toolkit, but one of the things that it introduced me to was the addressing approach to recruitment, the addressing approach to building your network. And addressing is an acronym that stands for, let's see if I can spell, age, disability, religion, ethnicity, social class structure, sexuality, indigenous ancestry. I'm forgetting one, gender for G, and one second, I'll pull up the I'll have this all linked, but just putting together a network inside of your community is a great place to start, is looking at those different demographics and seeing what are we doing for outreach to this demographic? What are we doing for outreach to these communities? And first, start building those relationships with other organizations that serve those communities. And I'm not talking about, oh, we've had one meeting and I told them what we did, they told me what they did, and then that's it. But building that community structure. Independent living is about relationships. So building relationships with those communities, and then once you have built those relationships and built that trust with another organization, then sending out like, hey, we're looking to hire. Do you know anybody who would be a qualified candidate? And because you've built that relationship and because you've built that trust, you can get people applying from those communities. And especially when you're building that relationship, you don't want your recruitment to seem tokenizing. There's, I'll also link this there. It's also inside of the Lead on Washington workbook. But one of the things that there's characteristics of white supremacy culture, and one of them is a sense of urgency. And it's this idea that everything needs to be done right away. And when we do things like that in a rush, then we don't have time to think about inclusion. We don't have time to think about equity. And we want to be able to have those aspects from us inside of our organizing from the very beginning. So that means there's not having a 2-week rollover of, oh, we want to hire somebody to them being hired. Take it slow. Coming from my service dog background, we have a saying inside of the community, slow is fast. That sounds a little counterintuitive, but in the service dog world, if you do your training right the first time and you take it slow and you don't try to rush things, then you have a sturdier foundation for the rest of your training. And I apply that into all aspects of my life, is seeing slow is fast. Build those. So to answer your question, first start on building those relationships and seeing how you can show up. I know one of the things that we've done inside the past in building relationships is providing ASL interpreting to events. So even though the event is not specifically disability related, we made it accessible. We made it accessible for those using ASL, and that's something that we can do. And that goes back to that show up, listen, volunteer, and don't expect a reward, because we're not building to receive something, we're building to create that web of relationships. And that's my thoughts on that question. Would anybody else like to share?
Mels, this is
Beth.
Arias. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's Beth. And before I answer that question, I'm going to read something that Maria has in the chat. And it says, more people from different cultures, backgrounds, and experiences have discussions with each other, the more we can understand and help each other and have more equitable communities. Do we have DEI policies? Yes, we do, at our center. And what do they look like? We do a survey in employment and saying what areas that we need to hire a person. We look at our disabilities. I have a physical disability. I have a heart condition, but it's not visible. So we want to make sure that we have visible and non-visible disabilities. We want to make sure that that we have people with low vision and vision impairments, deaf and hard of hearing. We want African American, Asians, and Hispanic, and Caucasians. So we want men and we want women. So that's how ours looks. We go to the staff. I mean, we have a spreadsheet, and we think of what is needed next. So I hope that answered your question.
Arius, would you like to share?
Just kind of going off what Beth was saying, Beth and Maria actually, I was going to say I agree with Maria's comment in the chat, because a lot of, again, we let pride and ego get in the way of having these uncomfortable conversations. And for me, many years ago, I went through a situation that was horrible. It put me in a place of everything that I thought I knew and that I thought I was doing, I had to rethink, and it humbled me to the point I had to ask for help. But then one thing that I found out and that I knew was, if I ask for help, I can't control how much help I'm given. But as long as I'm having the conversation, and I'm saying that too because it speaks to being an advocate, right? Sometimes we work in places or we go into situations and we do our advocate thing. We assess the situation. We work with the person to the best of the individual's abilities. But what happens when it's you? What happens when you're the one who needs to do the advocacy work, and better yet, you need someone to advocate for you, but the people that you are talking to and advocating with, or working with to advocate for you, they are just not getting it done. And even though you're advocating for yourself at the highest level, I might add, you're still getting told no. You're still going to end up without some housing. You're still going to end up in a way of feeling stuck. So going back to the comment before I go off on a tangent, is that we do need to have those conversations, and we do need to have everybody from all walks of life, different backgrounds, different cultures, having those conversations. But at the same time we're having those conversations, we also need to remember something that Mel said, that we do need to be listening. We do need to open our minds. And as much as we talk about supremacy, as much as we talk about prejudice and marginalization and things of that, we also need to look at ourselves of pride and not really wanting to have the conversation, because I know there are some people in every community who will just say, it didn't happen to me yet, or it's not going to happen to me, or this person wasn't resisting arrest, this person brought it on themselves. And those things can be just as hurtful as somebody being racist, prejudiced, or even creating a barrier for you systemically. Because it hurts when you have your own people will turn their back on you or take the side of the oppressor or the abuser, or take the side of a system that we know is broken and designed for us to fail in. And so I thank everyone for just keeping that open mind and take a second to look at that in the hopes that everyone will consider it from all sides and not just the side of, this is right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong. We all have to have an open mind first. And as far as DEI policies go, so I've worked at a couple of different centers. I've been in places where, fortunately enough, they had some skeleton, some outlines of it, but by me being there and being one of the few persons of color, or sometimes the only person of color, my experiences are what allowed someone to say we need to flesh these out in this manner. And it also gave me the confidence to say, hey, this is what I need and this is what I want for myself, but I need to be able to communicate that. And so, sometimes being able to build something is greater than something already being in place. And I'm just going to end my thought on that.
Rachel had her hand up.
Oh, Rachel clapped. I believe. Hey, Rachel, was your hand up? Okay, clapping. Okay. One of the things I wanted to just share a note before we go to the next question, and thank you, Arius, so much for sharing. I just wanted to, I posted 2 resources inside of the chat. One is the toolkit we're using at our SIL from Just Lead Washington. And then as well as the characteristics of white supremacy culture that I mentioned. And specifically, one of the things I like about this PDF that I posted is it doesn't just go over the characteristics of white supremacy culture, but it also has ways to combat them. So it gives a it gives like a way for us to move forward as well, instead of, because recognizing is part of the battle, but then we still have the other half of the battle, which is tearing down these systems of oppression. So our next question that we have, how frequently do you encounter white fragility, and how do you address, contend with, or combat it? When I first read this question, I had to control my facial expression because, at least for me, how frequently do you encounter white fragility? Every day. Every single
day. So I'm gonna just speak a little bit to it, and I'm chuckling, not to laugh, but it's a very uncomfortable chuckle right now, right? Simply because, again, I have to go back to it. I've been in spaces and I've worked for individuals who were the nicest people. I love them to death. But by me being the only person of color in that office or in this space for very long, right? We encounter it all the time. And most people think, white fragility is basically white guilt, right? And obviously there's a great book on it, but I kind of want to touch on the systemic piece of that as well. So I've been in situations where people have literally said, okay, you have somebody diverse on staff, so would you be willing to take this grant, or these things, are put him in these opportunities, ultimately to make us look good, right? They may not directly say that, but certain things happen, certain conversations are had. And yes, to piggyback off of Marco's comment in the chat, he said we can't talk about dismantling white supremacy without talking about dismantling capitalism, Western chauvinism, and U.S. imperialism, which is the greatest threat to human existence. I agree with you to a point, right? And my point is, we can't talk about these things. We can't talk about these things, right? Because if we do, it gets people scared, or it gets people frustrated, or now they're trying to push critical race theory, where you can't talk about it at all because it's something that black people or people who are enslaved at a point should just get over it, right? Because it's been hundreds of years, right? But they still don't understand how those trickling effects continue with the PSD for us. And when I say for us, for my people, for anybody who's been enslaved, for anybody who's ever felt that oppression, right? That systemic oppression, because even after slavery, right, blacks, they still didn't have the fair opportunities. A lot of them, even though they were free from slavery, a lot of them had to end up striking a deal with the person that enslaved them in order to still be able to sustain themselves, right? Um, I was reading the narrative of Frederick Douglass, and he talked about, being people were the slaves were freed, and then there was a slave who walked from the deep south, or who walked from the north to the deep south to pay his former slave master the last dollar he owed him, not because he owed it to him, but because he wanted to always keep his word, right? So when we talk about the white fragility and the white guilt, a lot of times blacks felt obligated, even now for myself, like going to a center, I feel like I cannot miss a day, right? I feel like I cannot miss a day, even if it puts a strain on my personal life, not because somebody is oppressing me, right? But I always know that all eyes are on me regardless. So even if I'm sick, I could be on my deathbed, or I could be, half dead or something. I'm still going to get up and try to go to work. And they say you can't go to work sick, right? But that's still privilege to me. It's privilege. For me, they have things in place where those, but it's just it's a mindset for me. It's what I was taught. It's the things that I have to I have to dismantle those systemic barriers in my mind, right? Those oppressions in my mind, right? Because I'm black, and there's the jokes, there's the comments of, oh, we take extra long breaks, we're loud, we're this, we're that, and those things followed us from those times of slavery, right? But there is somebody who does not know, or who does not care to understand, and is just ignorant to that they may think that this is the way it's supposed to go. So when you look at me, and I move to a place where they don't have a lot of black people to give them an example, it creates a certain amount of pressure. And if we don't have that conversation, that pressure turns into an insecurity. That pressure also turns into, hey, now it might be a little bit of self-loathing there. I don't have enough money, right? I don't have enough money to keep up with the Joneses, but I want this, but what will I do to get this? And then that can be just as tough, right? That can be just as hard, right? You know, um, white fragility, white guilt. A lot of times it's not my responsibility to carry that or have that conversation, right? We talk we hear people say that in some of these sessions, right? But it is my responsibility to tell you, hey, this is why I'm this way, and let's have a conversation about it. If you don't, then that's on you. It's not on me. We're approaching the end of this, and so I'm not going to talk anymore. But if you have any questions, anything, my email is somewhere on the agenda. Thank you guys for letting me talk, and I'm in my thought right there.
As we're coming to the end of this meeting, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for just sharing from your lived experience. I want to thank people for their questions. And just thank you for joining in on this conversation. This can often be a difficult conversation for all parties. One of the things that I want to challenge other white folks who may be inside of this meeting is just, when talking about race or when talking about marginalized identities that you do not identify with, and there might be a feeling of discomfort, often that discomfort comes from that white fragility and that white guilt. And so taking a moment to analyze it and not run from the discomfort, but look into it. And then I just wanted to note the resources posted inside of the chat will be put onto the website. I posted a third resource. If you have not had the chance to look at Sins Invalid, which is a queer, trans, BIPOC group based out of the Bay Area in California, they are the ones coining disability justice and the 10 principles of disability justice, and going off of Marcos talking about dismantling capitalism, Western chauvinism, and US imperialism. The disability justice approach takes in that anti-capitalist approach to our social justice movement. At least in my opinion, disability justice is our future. And so, yeah, I wanted to share that resource. Do we have any closing thoughts from our presenters?
Mels, this is Beth. And I'd just like to invite you, if you'd like to attend one of the DEI meetings, please join. Look on the April website. I'm quite sure Mels will have it posted up for us. And Herman, can you help me, please? It's the third Thursday of each month.
This Herman, that's what I have.
All right. And so please join us. We would love to hear from you.
This is Herman. Thank you all so much. There was so much to talk about. Reach out to us as any of these thoughts bubble and you want to exercise and implement DEI practices. Take care, everyone.